So the Fugitive Slave Act, more racist rhetoric, coming right up. What's up, y'all? Welcome back to Common Sense, Logic, and Reason. And as always, thank y'all for joining me today. So the Fugitive Slave Act is obviously an example of historical crime, and this is something that, another example of what the excuse that the race hustlers use to hype and hustle and peddle race all the time and keeping black people stuck on stupid. But anyway, so what was the Fugitive Slave Act? Well, it had two parts to it. Now, the first part of the Fugitive Slave Act was passed in 1793. Now, this was a law. It was passed by the federal government, and it required the federal government at the time, to aid the South in recovering slaves and returning them back to their owners. And obviously, slaves leaving a plantation to freedom and it was a common thing back then. So any slave who mostly attempted to go north into Canada, if the federal government found them and they were found to be runaway slaves, and the federal government would aid in returning them back to the slave master. So this was the first part of the Fugitive Slave Act. Now there was a compromise added to it back in 1850, right? And in this compromise, it was a compromise pretty much between the South and the North. Now, what did the North get out of it? Well, California entered the Union as a free state. So this was a compromise. It was just another area of territory that will be free. Now, what did the South get? Well, according to the act, the northern states or free states would be compelled to aid in the process of returning free slaves to their masters. So if people in the North found a slave that was a runaway or a claim was made, they basically, by law, according to this agreement, was compelled to help the South recover, or the slave owners recover their slave. Now, the Fugitive Slave Act was then repealed in 4 years later, well, not 4 years later, but 14 years later in 1864. And I'm guessing this had a lot to do with the Civil War, because the Civil War was ongoing at this time. And part of the reason for the war was slavery, no doubt. It wasn't the only reason that history tried to tell us, but it was part of it, no doubt. But when it comes down to historical crime, I always have to ask, where's the relevance in this? And to answer that question, there is no relevance. There are no slaves. Okay, slavery is ignorant, so you can't have fugitive slaves if there are no slaves. Now, we have a severe problem with illegal immigration and people sneak into this country seeking a better life. And honestly, I really, in that regard, I can't blame them, because I couldn't tell you if I wouldn't do the same, the seeking a better life, but it's still an illegal act and we can't allow it. But again, it's completely irrelevant nonsense. So yet another example of some BS that these race hustlers keep perpetrating and hyping that's irrelevant. Slavery ended over 150 years ago, but yet black people still keep being, they're not, as I always say, they're not physically enslaved, but they're mentally enslaved. They keep, most blacks keep mentally enslaved themselves with historical nonsense. Should we forget? Of course not. Because every time I say that, the first thing these blacks say is, well, you saying I should forget history. I've never, ever, ever, ever have you heard me say we should forget history. But we can't dwell on it, because being stuck on history is part of the biggest problem for black people now. Because we're so stuck on history, we're so stuck on crying about what our oppressors did us, right? And what they're quote unquote doing to us today, that we don't have time to deal with ourselves. That's the problem. But anyway, if you ever hear any of these race hustlers crying about the Fugitive Slave Act, well, now you know, and knowing it's half the battle. And as always, y'all, until next time.